For millions of young people throughout our country, this represents the American dream. Playing big-time Division I basketball in large arenas before enthusiastic and admiring fans. But for thousands of African-American young men and women athletes, that dream is a dream that may not see its reality. While most of the attention thus far is focused on the threatened boycott by the Black Coaches Association in response to a reduction in scholarships from 15 to 13 by the ruling body, the NCAA, very little attention is focused on the acceptance and rejection criteria for prospective student athletes, specifically grade point averages in conjunction with SAT and ACT scores.
We've seen a constant ratcheting up of these rules, which tend to affect disproportionately our kids. We've seen it happen to the point where we figure there's a lockout of the black youngsters. At a time when they need more opportunity, there's less opportunity. At a time when they need a lot more concerns on their behalf, there's less of it. At a time when they need more attention, more activities, more scholarship awards, there's less of it. And they've come up with all kinds of remedies in their minds, the NCAA that is, that they figure is all in the name of academic integrity. And we feel that this is a false premise because really it hasn't happened, it hasn't worked. Prop 48 is no longer in existence. They came out with Prop 48 in 1986. It was supposed to go for 10 years on an experimental basis. In other words, they took a group of youngsters, black kids, used an experiment on them, which we digested. The only person that stood up was John Thompson and I. John Thompson walked out. I began to speak about it in just about every fashion you can think of. Undue process spoke about it. Broken rules spoke about it. No one resisted that. We digested that. That was 5 years to do 4. First year you sit out, but you could scholarship the youngster. That was supposed to go 10 years. It targeted only black youngsters or Hispanic youngsters or kids from very, very poor backgrounds. When I talked with one of the guys from the USA Today paper and asked him, could you find one white kid, call the NCAA office, call Ursula Wash. He did call them, and he said, we know that there's one out there, but we can't find any. I think that the NCAA is a reactionary group. When they found that many schools were cheating, they thought it was wise to get together and set up an ad hoc committee headed by Derek Bach from Harvard and Robert Atwell of the Educational Association. And they set about to try to bring about what they considered academic integrity, because there were people screaming, well, you're using these kids, they're not graduating. And they said, well, let's meet and discuss in California, and they did at the convention. But there was no inclusion of any black, not even one black from a historically black school. They were all white presidents who were from big football entities because the football areas were cheating. So they figured they were going to correct this and bring about some remedy. So they met and came up with Prop 48. But it was supposed to go 10 years. It hasn't been successful, so now as a result of 2 years ago, they came up with Prop 42. Prop 42 is saying you can't get a scholarship. Now they're coming in with another rule, which would suggest that they're going to make their standards higher, and they're going to run the standards up to 750 plus a 2.50 for the youngsters. Now, who is that target against? I don't have to answer that question, because we know that the thousands of youngsters that did not get into the NCAA big schools are youngsters who are black and come from disadvantaged and poor areas.
Temple University's Aaron McKee and Eddie Jones are both so-called Proposition 48 student athletes. Both Jones and McKee say that in addition to losing their first-year playing eligibility, they were both stigmatized.
I mean, there are all kinds of stigmas that come with being a Prop 48. You're dumb, you know, all you do is play basketball, you don't do nothing. All they look at you is just being a dumb jock. I mean, and that hurts in a sense when people think of you in that sense. You know what I mean? Because I look at myself as a strong African-American man, a positive influence, a positive role model for the inner city youth.
Being African-American, I don't think you get all the type of schooling needed in order to go to the next level of education. they label Prop 48s as not, they won't be able to graduate on time, they won't be able to do other things, that they'll get kicked out of school early. And that kind of, I was like, hey, this won't happen to me. I'm gonna succeed in life in school. Academically, I'm doing very well. I'm on time to graduate in August. I think the NCAA should reimburse all Prop 48s for being on time to graduate out of school. I mean, just paying for school and not being able to practice. I mean, I think that's wrong. I think they should be able to practice and also get that year back if they're on the right track to graduate.
As far as the NCAA tightening up on the rules, will have a great impact on African American athletes, because you have the majority of the African American athletes that you have come from like public schools and inner cities, and they don't get the education that most, I would say, suburban schools would get.
McKee's point about the quality of education at inner city public schools seems to be supported by two other success stories. Michael Harden and Ernest Pollard were casualties of Prop 48, yet both Harden and Pollard graduated from Temple University with respectable grades and on time. Yet what is noteworthy is the fact that while both failed to score the minimum 700 on their SATs, both Harden and Pollard's final college grade point averages were consistent with their high school grades.
My grade point average coming out of Roman Catholic was good. I had like a 2.9, but my SAT score was maybe 620 or 600. My final college grade point average was about 2.4 or 2.5.
Coming out of high school, my GPA was 2.67. My SAT scores, I think at that time, I needed like a 670, or 680, I'm sorry. I scored a 670 once and a 675 the second time. After my freshman year, I had a 3.0 GPA. I graduated with a 2.6 overall GPA. Being as though I was highly recruited, when I walked in the classroom, people knew who I was. You can always look in the back of your head and you can tell that they were always looking at you. And the teachers, they behaved differently. They treated the athletes a lot differently than they would with the regular students. And that was primarily because of the stigma that was attached in being Proposition 48.
You didn't even bring a present. Did your mama cook chitlins or something?
No, some black guys.
I don't want black guys. You tell I want clean chitlins and hog maws. I'm a southern boy.
Make it pressure.
Hey, we worry about pressure later. Put a lid on it.
Dr. Peter Likens, president of Lehigh University and the first president of the NCAA's President's Commission, asserts that race is not the issue.
There are those who suggest that the recent tightening of academic standards for Division I sports is a direct reaction to the dominance of the black athlete in football and basketball. How do you respond to that assertion?
That's a sad assertion. I don't attach any credibility to it. I know that sitting among the presidents in the President's Commission in those early days when we were trying to make sure that we were not exploiting athletes in our institutions, trying to make sure that the young people who came to us got the kind of preparation in high school that enabled them to succeed in college, that at that time one of our leaders, the chairman of the President's Commission, was John Slaughter, who was at that time chancellor, I guess, of University of Maryland, is now president of Occidental College, a black engineer, a man who really cares deeply about the fate of young African-American males. But John believes just as strongly as I believe that we needed to provide a challenge to young men and women, black and white, to do the right thing in terms of high school preparation, so they could not just succeed in college as athletes, but succeed as students, and then succeed throughout their entire lives. I personally believe that the SAT is not an adequate sole arbiter of admission to a university or qualification for athletic eligibility. And again, if I can go back to those early days with John Slaughter, he and I both argued then that there should be a weighted sum of rank in class or other kind of grade point representation with SATs, so that if you're a little short of the anticipated performance on the SAT side, you could make up for that by doing a little better than the minimal expectation with grades, and vice versa. We were in the minority at that time. Instead, there was adopted in the old Prop 48 days, the Bylaw 51J, restrictions that were absolute in terms of both SATs and grade point averages. The NCAA is evolving, however, toward, as you surely realize, toward admissions criteria that do permit some adjustment of minimal expectations on SATs if your grades are good, or minimal expectations on grades if your SATs are higher. That's a more sensible way to go.
Well, I'm not saying I'm against standards, because we all are with standards. But standards are there because it deals with human beings. Standards should be flexible enough. I can't raise that ceiling until I raise this floor. So my concern when I'm dealing with youngsters that I want to be educated, I want to be able to say, hey, we have standards, but our standards must have flexibility because the standards are related to youngsters. Princeton sent them a letter saying to them very clearly, and I have a copy of the letter in my drawer here, which says very clearly, do not use these tests as a means of discarding athletes. They ignored it, which is complete arrogance.
Sports sociologist Dr. Harry Edwards of the University of California at Berkeley has consistently rendered blistering criticism at the NCAA and collegiate sports in general. Dr. Edwards charges that African-American athletes are being exploited by big-time sports money.
I think that Proposition 42 was simply a money-saving scheme along the lines of the cut in scholarships. It had nothing to do with education any more than Proposition 48 had anything to do with education. It was a face-saving scheme to give the impression of a concern about academic integrity, as opposed to dealing with academic integrity, which would have involved guaranteeing 5 years of support for every athlete that's recruited, or support through the BA degree. It would have to do with a living stipend so that an athlete could at least enjoy some of the cultural and educational amenities of the campus, as opposed to simply living, eating, sleeping, drinking, football or basketball. It would have to do with such things as providing the kinds of support systems after an athlete is recruited, as opposed to this heinous and horrendous focus upon pre-enrollment kinds of preparations and qualifications that many athletes coming from extremely desperate educational circumstances in the traditional black community have no hope of ever fulfilling. They would instead set up support systems of post-enrollment character to make sure that academically these athletes develop. So when you look at the full constellation of events and developments, it is very clear that the NC2A is not concerned about education. They are concerned about eligibility, and more directly, they are concerned about their money. They're concerned about their television contracts. And everything else is secondary at best, including the kids who produce the money.
The new rule that was passed, 2.5 for 1995, is going to be a direct hit at so many kids from the inner city, the rural areas as well. I think that is unbelievable. And then it raised the SAT scores. It's on a scale, goes to 900 if you have a 2.0. Well, I know that I can write the check out. I happen to be financially in a position where I can write a check out for my girls to be able to go take the Princeton review. $700, $800 check. A lot of people can't do it. A lot of kids I coached in Detroit, a lot of those mothers and fathers, to put food on the table is tough enough.
I don't think you should put a rule on just those who don't get a certain score on the test, because some students are just not good test takers.
I think the schools need to do a better job training these kids for the SATs. I know me, when I was in Roman Catholic, I didn't start getting training until my senior year. If I would have had training for the SAT my junior year or my sophomore year, I think I could have passed it with no problem.
In point of fact, the SAT, ACT, and other standardized tests have come under fire for years due to perceived cultural, socioeconomic, and gender bias. Bob Schaefer is Public Education Director for Fair Test, the National Center for Fair and Open Testing, a testing consumer watchdog group located in Cambridge, Massachusetts.
Fair Test believes that based on all of the evidence, NCAA Proposition 42 and 48 are totally inappropriate uses of cutoff scores. They are in violation of the test maker's own guidelines, they are biased, and they are invalid, and hence the NCAA should drop that criteria right now in the interests of both educational equity and excellence. In fact, the NCAA's own data shows that Prop 42 and 48 are not working as they're supposed to, and that they are creating unfair barriers to access, particularly to minority students who see athletics as a route to college and to financial aid. Many people wonder why the NCAA even adopted such cutoffs in the face of evidence to the contrary. And what it appears is that the NCAA is playing politics. They're trying to show that they're being tough. They're trying to crack down on genuine abuses, which we do know go on in college athletic programs. But by doing it, they have created an arbitrary guideline that is in fact creating larger abuses than the ones they were designed to deal with. If, for example, they wanted to make sure that students were capable of doing college work before they played athletics, they could go back to the situation as it existed a number of years ago in the 1980s when you couldn't play interscholastic athletics as a freshman. That means you had to prove your ability to do college work before you could play interscholastic sports. That deals with the real problem. Posing a test score cutoff as a solution is a phony one.
SAT and ACT scores, as well as a general tightening of academic standards, are not the only issues that have raised the ire of the Black Coaches Association. Coaches also complain about lack of input in the decision-making process by the NCAA, an unacceptable paucity of blacks in coaching and administrative ranks, and burdensome regulations.
Somebody's shooting somebody down here at 1st and K Street, and I can jump in a car and go down there because I might happen to know the kid. I can't take out a manual and look at the manual and say that this kid is a recruitable athlete or not a recruitable athlete. And that's where all of us are restricted, and that's where we're frustrated, because we feel that athletics has far more significance to us than just the competition that we have amongst each other. And that's what we've been restricted to.
I think the problem is we have a rule book that's unbelievable. I mean, you got to be a lawyer to be able to interpret an NCAA rules book. And I'm for anything that can help kids, not hurt kids.
With the many, many rules which we find ourselves faced with now, there are many things we cannot do, because the definition of a prospective athlete is when he reaches 9th grade. So I can't go into a recreation center in a wildcat situation not knowing that I'm talking with youngsters that may be a prospective student athlete. We can't make speeches concerning career development when a question is asked of me, how did I get involved in coaching? Asked of me in terms of my basketball team, in terms of Aaron McKee or Eddie Jones or some of my players that might have an influence and impact on a youngster. We can't answer that question. But I look like saying I can't answer it because that's related to recruiting. That's related to my basketball team. I represent Temple University. John Chaney and Temple University are synonymous. So rather than looking at it and saying you can divorce yourself of a recruiting speech, your very presence says that you're there in a recruiting aspect. We also want the public to understand that coaches do not have any, now as a result of the last few years, we do not have any vote. We don't have any say in terms of the legislative process. That's all held by the presidents in this country. When we sent Mike Krzyzewski down to speak at the convention last year, the reason why we didn't go back to the NABC this year and went to Congress is because when we sent him down there, he stood up on the stage to speak to them about some of these very same issues, and guess what? They laughed. There were guys in the audience that were asleep. So I said, why should we embarrass? He's one of the most prestigious coaches who coaches Duke, you understand, who's speaking on behalf of coaches, trying to be included in the process, and they're laughing at him. I said, no, we won't do that anymore. We'll have to take other measures, other steps, and that's one reason why we've gone to Congress, to make sure we make the public aware of what's taking place in college athletics.
Well, I have a lot of empathy with the Black Coaches Association. We feel they're our brothers in the NABC, and they're in boycotting this summit. They're not saying they don't want to be a part of the NABC, but they feel they have to go outside the system.
We've worked within that system our entire coaching careers. And so for someone to suggest that we have not worked in the system, that's all we've ever done.
The public perception may be that there's a bad blood between the Black Coaches Association and white coaches. Is it your sense that the majority of white coaches support the concerns of the Black Coaches Association?
Oh, I don't think there's any doubt about it. I don't think it's just a matter of black-white. I think it's a matter of all the coaches, basically the guys I've talked to. I mean, I've read quotes from Mike Krzyzewski, and I've read quotes from all the guys out there, the Dean Smiths, and guys really heavily involved who support many of the issues. I want to tell you this, and this is just my feeling. I think they have a legitimate argument, the Afro-American coaches, when they talk about the facts. And the facts are very simple. One doesn't have to be a genius. I happen to be white. I have no say about it. John Chaney's black. He has no say about it. But the bottom line is we're people, and we have a lot to say about the kind of people we are. But the numbers don't lie. We have 3 Afro-American coaches in Division I in football. I mean, are you kidding me? This is the 1990s. We have 3 guys at Wake Forest, Temple, and basically at Eastern Michigan. Certainly not great places to get it done in terms of to become stars in the coaching fraternity. They have to work their gut out to be able to be competitive in those environments. They're not at Notre Dame and Michigan and schools where you have the great facilities and tradition. So that's a legitimate argument. 3, when there are 49% of the kids that play Division I football are Afro-Americans. Let's get real. That's a legitimate number. We have 33 major conferences in America. There is not one commissioner who's Afro-American. We have the hierarchy, the NCAA, all the upper echelon people. You check that out and find out how many Afro-Americans. Take a look at the athletic directorships across America. That is where their argument is so solid and so legitimate, and they want people to sit down and they want to be treated in a fair fashion. There's nothing wrong with that. I support that.
We only get scholarships in the revenue-producing sports. People talk about how integrated sports are. The reality is we only get scholarships in the revenue-producing sports. If we don't produce the money, we don't get the scholarship. We simply pay through the revenue-producing sports for all of the other sports. Black athletes are putting a lot of white kids through school on gymnastics and water polo and field hockey and softball and badminton and tennis and golf and skiing scholarships. We get scholarships where we produce, and if we don't produce, they don't need us on the campus. That's right. And I don't care whether it's Division I or Division II, you look and see where the black kids are playing the sports, and it's in football and basketball. It's a production issue. They don't have you around for aesthetics or for academic involvement or for what you bring to the campus in terms of culture and diversity. You have got to produce. Black people have essentially been moved from the cotton fields to the football fields and from the Jim Crow courts to the basketball courts, but the basic structure remains the same.
Is the NCAA a racist institution?
I don't think that they're racist. I think that what happens, it is a power institution which moves more and more toward indifference toward those who would not comply with them. Now, it can fall into a category where it becomes racist by accidentally or incidentally. I mean, I got an education accidentally and incidentally. I didn't go there with intention. I wanted to dribble a basketball for the rest of my life. It was Carrie Meeks, Congressman Meeks, who said to me, "You're going to get education. Now that I have you, you're going to go to class or you're not going to play basketball." I wanted to play basketball, so I went to class. So I got an education accidentally and incidentally. And I think the NCAA can move more and more toward not having compassion for the majority of people in this country. The underclass in this country happens to be the majority. I mean, higher education should not be for the privileged few. It should be for everyone. Japan educates 99% of all its people, and they save money because they don't have to spend money on crime. They don't have to spend money on health problems. If this country were to take on that same policy, it could wipe out crime. It could wipe out some of our health problems because you'd have more money to spend on the things that really matter in life because you could wipe out the other. The more education you get, the less crime there is.
Student athletes' graduation rates are also contested, as is the issue of gender equity.
I would like for them to understand that this gender equity that they talk about is not being phased in properly because it doesn't address the issue, and it doesn't address the issue of making it equal for black women. For instance, Vivian Stringer, Marion Washington out of Kansas, those women, there's only 12 women black coaches at the major colleges. Well, they told them, and when you talk to Cardis Collins, when you talk with her in the Black Caucus Committee, you will find out that gender equity means that you're going to phase in more women into the sport. But they're coming into the areas where it's predominantly white. Lacrosse, field hockey. It's not going to mean more jobs for black women with gender equity. It's not going to mean more scholarship for black kids with gender equity or black women in gender equity until you begin to offer more scholarships into the areas. Black youngsters, both male and female, participate in 3 sports: football, basketball, and track. There's no participation, very low participation, in the other sports. It requires money to be a tennis player. It requires money to be someone who's going to be in the Olympics in swimming. You have to come from money. Field hockey, lacrosse, they've always been historically sports. Golf, historical sports have always been white and predominantly white. So you haven't included, you've excluded.
The first thing to be said is that we have not, as a nation, made much progress in establishing equity between the genders in intercollegiate athletics. We have a long, long way to go. Secondly, I have the sense that the most dramatic achievements have been in basketball and volleyball on the women's side. And those are sports where African American women have had a strong presence. But it doesn't surprise me if Coach Cheney has observed that colleges and universities, in an effort to provide more women with intercollegiate varsity experience, are developing opportunities in emerging sports. We had some legislation in San Antonio that made it possible for certain sports like archery or sports that are probably rarely attractive to African American women. Such sports are beginning to establish a presence on college campuses. So he may well have a point statistically.
The other thing that's very important is that they publish graduation rates. They're in error when they publish graduation rates. We all know that the athletes themselves in this country has a higher graduation rate than the average student body. When we look at this book, I can pull out to you a school, a college in this country has a 31% graduation rate among its student body.
I have seen data that I found shocking, indicating for certain institutions that we think of as sound academic institutions, the percentage of basketball players who graduate is in the teens. And the average for college students in America, I believe, is something like 53%.
Hey, John Cheney, John Thompson, Nolan Richardson, George Raveling, they would have never had the opportunity to be where they are today. Big-time leaders and guys who are great role models for young people if somebody didn't give them a chance. I say in America, who are we to determine whether or not because a kid doesn't score a certain score that he doesn't have potential? Let the schools decide.
If we want to wipe out some of these social evils, then the NCAA should be in lockstep with what education is all about for the underclass as well as for the elite.
Who are we to deny kids? America's supposed to be the land of opportunity, the land of dreams. Let these kids realize their dreams. Let them feel their dreams. Let them have that chance. Let's help kids, not hurt kids.